I think that's a lot of old bollocks. Obsession with money is just wrong. Mansplaining is you showing off your competence. I know about this. It baffles me that somebody would offer that as useful advice. We are going to judge you on your first sentence and we're going to make you feel shit if it's bad. It wasn't a game. It was serious. I'm hugely grateful to have been thrown into that bear pit. All humans want three things, which is survival, connection, and status.
2, 1, roll it.
This is StoryCo, the podcast about the business of story and storytelling. I'm James Kirkham. Let's get into it. My guest today is Will Storr, Sunday Times best-selling author, award-winning long-form journalist, and the man whose Science of Storytelling course is taught inside LVMH, James Street, and the European Parliament. Before any of that, he reported from refugee camps in Africa and remote Aboriginal communities in Australia. His investigation into sexual violence against men in conflict zones won him an Amnesty International award. His books include Selfie, The Science of Storytelling, and The Status Game. His new one, A Story's a Deal, argues that every story ever told is really an identity transaction. Become who you want to be, and I'll give you what I'm selling. Apple's 1984 advert made $500 million on exactly that trade. Will has also ghostwritten 2 million copies worth of other people's memoirs, and his great-great-uncle is the Victorian who invented the self-help book. Will, tell me a story.
I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you an ancient Bengali story.
Wow.
And the story is this: a tiger, a hunter, a tiger. That's the story. It's a lovely example because it does so much to tell us about the nature of story. Like a tiger, a hunter, a tiger just shows you that firstly how much work the recipient of the story does to kind of build the story. The writer, the storyteller, gives them the kind of the basic elements, and then the rest of it is constructed in the mind. It tells us about the importance of some sort of technical things like cause and effect. You know, one thing leading to the next, leading to the next, leading to the next. You know, one of the things we do as humans, you know, this storytelling animal, like one of these studies that I talk about a lot is when they put people in front of a computer screen with randomly moving dots, invariably people start telling stories about the dots, like this dot's chasing this one and this one's hiding. You know, we build stories out of these things. And so that kind of a tiger, a hunter, a tiger's doing that. You know, you can imagine, it's a tiger, the tiger's eating the hunter. Right, okay, I get it. You know, the basic structure of story, crisis, struggle, resolution, is kind of my definition of what's the basic definition of a story. And the basic definition of a story is the account of the overcoming of an obstacle in pursuit of a goal. And it even does that. Those 6 words tell us an awful lot about story, the nature of story and how story works.
I think you're already given a glimpse of your kind of, for me, what is going to be a bit of an education over the next sort of hour in terms of the anatomy of a story and what makes a story. And I find it fascinating. Now, I want to get into that because your ability to forensically look at it is kind of why you're here and why I'm so excited. But let's go right back to the start. Tell us a little bit about where it began for you, your writing. Weren't you making fanzines at one point? Is that the origins of your own story?
Well, I mean, the actual true origin was back at school. I went to a Catholic comprehensive school. We had a school magazine, and it was awful. It was literally like prayer of the month. They had a prayer of the month. It was like for real, and like
I'd love to know what won it. Each month.
Yeah. And it was just awful. And I remember but there was one day where our careers advisor said, I know there's 2 people in this room they said they want to be journalists when they grow up, they want to be writers, and none of them are writing for the school magazine. And I was like, that's because it's rubbish. So I decided to set up my own magazine, and I called it The Groover. Awesome. And the school were against the Groover. They didn't like the idea of it. So they were like, right, we're going to charge you to photocopy this thing. So they charged me. So that's fine. I'll charge people to buy the thing. And so I was selling the Groover, and we outsold the school magazine just instantly because it was just full of gossip. Yeah, we had a problem page, and we fake write the problems, but about other people's gossip. So
Brilliant.
it was really mean, but it was kind of fun. And I would cut cartoons out of Private Eye and stick them on, and a photo with this thing. So yeah, I mean, the school did not like it. My parents didn't like it. It was really.
So were you an avid consumer of magazine culture? Even then, when you're referencing others, like cutting out from Private Eye, for example, was that always around the house? Were you a keen sort of buyer of mags and culture?
Yeah, well, kind of. It was like I was more of a reader of books and newspapers. Really, I remember cutting out a column that I liked about somebody complaining about the London Underground and pinning it to my wall. And my dad was like, "What's that on your wall?" And I was like, "Oh, I just liked it." And it was just, you could see his face was like, such a what is this child?
I love that.
Yeah, but looking back,
Says a
you can
lot.
see, and then what happened was that I was very involved in the local music scene. There's like a music venue, which I think you know because you're from a similar part of the world from me. Yeah, it was the Rumble Club, and today it's called the Forum.
Yeah.
And the Rumble Club was this little scrappy little venue where they had all the bands would come through. They were very cool indie kids running the Rumble Club, and I was a mettler. And they were like, we don't know anybody that likes that music. Do you want to write a column? So I started writing this rock music column.
Oh, nice.
And then that guy left the fanzine and asked me to take it over when I was about 17, 18. And then I started my own fanzine. And then that fanzine got spotted by somebody who worked for Loaded magazine.
What was the fanzine that you had?
Well, it was called Fiasco, and then I changed the name to Professional Cynic.
Love it.
I think Fiasco was. I never liked the name.
So Professional Cynic, right in the heart of the Britpop era, was it? That was this
Exactly,
mid-90s?
Yeah, so this would have been getting on early mid-90s
Yeah.
now. Yeah, for sure.
So that must have been quite some level, the fact that it was noticed at all. Maybe just give us a bit more of the context and memories of that time, certainly for some of the younger audience who'll be listening, right? So fanzine stacked up, in record shops, picked up like...
Yeah, so I was a hustler. I mean, it was like I failed, the context is I failed all my exams, didn't get any A-levels, I couldn't go to university, but I was working in the local record shop, Long Player, this cool indie record shop, and I was I was kind of interviewing all the bands, putting this magazine together.
And it got noticed and it got picked up.
Yeah, I think what happened was they were following interviewing some band that was playing the Forum, and then saw it, and that's it. I mean, people think about Loaded as this kind of lads mag, and that's what it became, but it was kind of it was all founded by fanzine people like James Brown, Tim Southwell, Bill Burrows, Ben Marshall. They all started their careers like me, editing their own fanzine. So, and it had that Loaded was the original vision was this kind of national fanzine. It was just full of things we're enthusiastic about, sport, music, mucking about.
I never realised that was the original ambition, and I know James Brown's recently released a kind of an ode to the era. I think it's called Zine Age Kicks.
Zine Age Kicks,
brilliant name, and it's fabulous, kind of beautiful looking. And I know I probably obsess about that culture quite a lot, but there's something in that mix of DIY. But ultimately, it's just exudes passion, right?
Yeah,
punk. And I remember once I was in an interview with James, and I kind of was saying, it felt like Loaded then was meme culture before the internet existed. It reminded me of that. Stuff could be seen and then talked about and shared and told as lore and anecdote and sort of spread. And that was often humorous, sometimes it was so far removed from just the lads mag kind of. But tell us a bit more about maybe the time in the era, and did you stay long? Did you learn much? Was it just crazy times?
Loaded?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, so the bigger picture with Loaded really is that what happened was Loaded was massive, and FHM started being a bit more of what we think of as the lads mag with the girls and the high street honeys that had the thing, and they just started outselling us by just multiples, and so of course the pressure just became immense for us to turn Loaded into kind of an FHM thing, and that it happened, unfortunately. But in the early years, it really was, as I say, this national kind of fanzine, and it was staffed by people who were obsessed with writing. And so my first few 2 or 3, I mean, I was there for 2 or 3 years in total, but the first couple of years especially, I was surrounded by people quite, aggressive, young guys. And their kind of status game was writing, and specifically feature writing, long form journalism. They were obsessed with it, and it was like you were judged on things like how good is your first sentence, like that, that was one of the things in this. So we'd always look at each other's first sentences. What's the most insane structure you can get away with while still making the piece work? So that was the level, and it was quite a bully boy atmosphere. It was intimidating. I was just this kid from Tunbridge Wells,
But words as weapons, and writing as a comparable tool in the way you describe it, I'm finding fascinating. I've never considered it as such.
Yeah, and it's like it was tough, but it was my training ground. I was kind of beaten into becoming good.
Yeah.
It was that. It was a kind of a no mercy kind of situation. But you're surrounded by really talented, enthusiastic, slightly insane people.
How
So,
did you
yeah.
respond to that climate for the boy who was cutting out articles about the underground in his bedroom?
Yeah.
Well, clearly you had something about you that thought that you were obsessed or into.
Yeah.
Did you immediately respond to that kind of challenge of that environment?
Yeah, I did. Life at the time was failure. Like I'd failed all my exams. My dad was convinced, was just desperate to go to Oxford University, and I couldn't even get into.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like mental.
Yeah.
While all my friends were at university, I was working in a shop. That was what was going on. I was earning £80 a week, I think, and £45 a week was my rent. I was staying in this little attic room. So I had this opportunity from Loaded, and it was like, oh my God, it was like the heavens had opened, and I've been given one more chance to succeed. So I had this kind of desperate feeling that this is your last chance, dude. Because you're going to be working in the shop for the rest of your life if you're not careful.
Powerful driver. Right?
Yeah, so it was really what it was. So I responded in that way. I was kind of probably almost too enthusiastic. I was probably quite annoying. Like I was just obsessed with writing and getting it right, and it was all I could think about.
Is it the obsession that took you? Because I think now, and many of the people watching or listening to the show will know you for it's almost forensic analysis and understanding basically of the written form in whatever way, shape, or or the whichever guise that might be in. Did it kind of begin there then? Was it your efforts to get ahead and become better? Did it lead you to understanding everything from structure and narrative, and was it born from that time?
So when I started at Loaded, a guy called Michael Holden, a very talented writer called Michael Holden, said, look, if you want to figure out what we do here, you got to read the New Journalism by Tom Wolfe.
Oh, really?
And the New Journalism is if you're not familiar with it, it's a collection of essays, and it was published in the 60s. And it's called the New Journalism because back then feature writing was the new journalism. Long form journalism didn't exist. And so what Tom Wolfe was saying was, look, there's this amazing, exciting thing happening. And it began in Esquire magazine in America, and then Hunter S. Thompson made it really well known, but it's applying the methods of fiction, of literature, to true stories, and it had never been done before. And so,
Right.
I read that, and actually, what he asked me to read was just read the introduction, because and that's Tom Wolfe telling the story of how it happened, how journalists started using the techniques of literature to write true stories, and that really opened it up for me because it's like when I was doing my fanzine, it was just sort of a kind of sit down with the band for half an hour, rush out, bash it all out. I wasn't really thinking about craft. I wasn't actually thinking about, is this a good piece or not? I was just boshing it out,
I'm sure.
But this really rewired me. It was like, it sounds pompous to call it, see it as an art, but I started seeing it as an art, long form journalism. It's like, and when you read, Gay Talese and Hunter S. Thompson, it is an art. Like these people are incredibly, amazingly good at taking real life and turning it into something with all the quality of good literature.
I can't help but think where we're sat here today in 26 in an age now of AI and the seismic impact they're about to have. But it feels like a culture of paradoxes where we've got, in many ways, long forms in really rude health with the rise of, say, Substack, for example, and the opportunity that people have there, and in a way, a fanzine-like opportunity of write and get it out there, and people can effectively pick their version off the shelf and follow their interests. And yet, exactly at the same time, people are filling platforms and feeds with stuff that's not even theirs, with a single word prompt that then author as their own. How do you see that art, which I agree with, by the way, and I love, fitting right now where we are today?
I think one of the sad things that I've seen in my career, which began like the first issue of Loaded publishing was literally was the January 2000 issue. So it's like a 21st century career. I have seen the rapid decline of feature writing, and the decline has been about budgets. To write a really great story, you need to get on a plane often. Even then, we're seen as, well, how much? What do you need, really? And these days, Substack is amazing, but a lot of Substack is more like commentary than it is about feature writing, because it's not just about the money. You've also got to have the time to be like 2 weeks, 3 weeks in my day, perhaps, if you were lucky. But back in the 60s and 70s, months you had to write a story, and if the story didn't pan out, oh well, just go and write the next one. That was how it was. That's one of the reasons they could be so bloody good at this in the 60s and 70s, is because they had a huge amount of time and they had a huge amount of budget, and we just don't have that anymore. And that's in large part because of the internet. The advertising money went from magazine companies and newspaper companies over to Google, and Facebook is nothing like it was in my day, let alone in the 60s and 70s.
I've very much been a part of, I guess, this digital social media era, which I have this bizarre sense of almost guilt for now because I resent so much of it. I was sat with a friend of mine who used to work for Alexander McQueen, Nike. You know, he's all about the craft. And I saw him recently and I assumed he would lay into AI because I hadn't caught up with him for a while. His was the opposite. He kind of posited this theory that was very different. He said, no, I think we're back. We both agreed that the last 5-10 years maybe has kind of seen a bit of a flatlining in many parts of culture. Everything feels a bit samey. He said, when we're not sort of applying our output, our work for feeds as much for the many, we've got this thing that needs to know you better than you know yourself, that you're back to a one-to-one relationship. So be it like he served under Alexander McQueen, be it Picasso in his studio, whatever version of that artist who might be a quite insular character, that person could perhaps rise again and we might see a surprising revival of almost the rock star editor and these people where taste and judgment and being that person and perhaps slightly mad in their way, but they don't conform to the menu, might return. I don't know if that's overly optimistic, but I kind of love the idea that maybe there is that chance where that maybe it still comes down to budgets, but that judgment and taste and spending time with what's important again, perhaps we're going to yearn for that more than ever.
Yeah, I think with the kind of budgets thing, I think what feature writing was in the 20, 30 years ago, there's podcasts that are filling that space now. So there are still really amazing long form stories being told, but today's a podcast. It's not it's not a Sunday Times cover story or whatever. But for AI, I think the optimistic version of what AI is going to do to us is kind of that. It's the AI is always going to revert to the mean. It's going to give you the sum of the average, and actually great writing, great art, whatever it is, doesn't want to do that. But, the really interesting stuff. I think if it incentivizes people to lean into their individuality, lean into their weirdness, which is their humanness in a way, then it might end up having this kind of accidentally good effect. It's like the return of the iconoclast, the Björk and the Tricky,
absolutely
musicians of my day. These absolute individuals. Like if you were to set AI to design a pop star, it wouldn't design Tricky or Björk. It would design Taylor Swift a million times over. So if we go towards Björk and away from Taylor, for me, that's a good thing.
I agree. And I'm certain we're going to at least yearn for that. Very interesting what you were just describing there when you were talking about the individual. You said that every successful story offers audience an identity and asks them to buy it. Tell us a little bit more about that premise, if we've got that correct.
Yeah, that's right. So this is kind of the kind of thesis of my recent book, A Story is a Deal, which is a book about how storytelling can be the most powerful way of persuading people or leading people. And so it kind of speaks to this idea that we are a story, that the brain is this amazing machine for taking reality and turning it into a story which we're at the center of.
So whatever we do, we are predisposed to do that in any situation.
Yeah, we make story out of anything. That's the brain. It's like a tiger, a hunter, a tiger again. The human brain, the human will turn that into a narrative. And so the most important story it tells is the story of me. What the brain wants to do is make us the hero of the story of our lives. And I don't mean that in a narcissistic way. I mean in the basic fundamental way of what is a hero in a story. A hero is a character who is flawed and makes mistakes and gets things wrong, but is optimistic and tries hard. And through being optimistic and trying hard and through bettering themselves, they earn two things. First thing is sort of connection, belongingness, all that love and acceptance, but also status, value, respect, esteem from other people. And that's what you see in fiction. You see low status people or isolated people, the orphan becoming high status in archetypal storytelling. And that's what the brain kind of wants of our life. So I think the most persuasive stories are the ones that appeal to that. They appeal to that identity. They say, I see you, I know you, and I know how to get you from there up to there.
The word deal is a very interesting word to use then in the title. Is that what you mean? That is it almost a deal-like transaction?
It is. Subconsciously, it is, because it's basically saying, if you do as I want you to do, as I'm willing you to do, your reward is going to be connection and status. You're going to be more loved and you're going to be more respected. And that's what everybody wants, because we're tribal. We want to fit into our tribe, and we want the reputation of somebody that offers value to our tribe. So that's why, lots of the best kind of adverts subconsciously offer that thing. Like one of the most famous ones, which everybody will know, is you can say Apple's here's to the crazy ones. Like a lot of the Apple ads, like a lot of the best ads, they tell you nothing about the product. There's no product in it. There's no specs. There's no price. It's just offering connection to a tribe. Like if you buy Apple Computer, it's going to tell everybody that you're a world changer, you're a creator, you're a maverick, you're a rebel, and that's what everybody kind of wants to, wants to feel. And it works. It's like a massively successful ad. A more recent one that's perhaps not well so known, which I really like, is the example of a Brazilian football club called Sports Club Recife, like a huge, people are obsessed with this club in Brazil. And so they got involved with a campaign to increase the level of organ donations. They had this amazing ad campaign where they had, say, somebody that needed a lung transplant saying, if you donate your lungs after you die, I will keep breathing for Sports Club Recife. And somebody who needed a corneal transplant, I will keep going to the matches. My heart will keep beating for Sports Club Recife. They gave out, I think like 50-odd thousand Sports Club Recife donor cards to fans to fill in. And it was just the most insane success. The year after that campaign, the donation level went up 54%. And for the first time in history, the waiting list for corneal transplants and heart transplants went down to 0. So, and that's all about appealing to identity. Like people's identity is partly, I'm a fan of Sports Club Recife. So they do a deal, donate your heart, donate your lungs, and you can be like a super fan. You can be somebody that keeps another fan going even after you die.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a surreal offer, like, whoa, that's odd. But it worked incredibly well. So that's what I mean about it's a deal. So when they do, they feel good. Like my organs are going to be in the body of a fan. I mean, I don't know how they could guarantee that, but that was the offer.
I didn't know that campaign. And funnily enough, and I spent many years in advertising, and I was at a place called Leo Burnett, and Leo Burnett tailor-made a similar campaign, and strangely it was about organ donation, but this was in Argentina.
Okay.
Basically they take a kind of a celebrity from Buenos Aires or wherever, basically talks about, hey, we've got this incredible Bentley and we're actually just going to bury it. Everyone's up in arms at this sheer waste. And then suddenly, seemingly live, during this live broadcast, he stops and he said, why are you so worried about us effectively burying the price of a Bentley when you do this every day with organs? And it was superb.
That's great.
And the team behind it, I remember meeting, and the challenge that they had to get this far, because they fooled everyone in the media. But again, storytelling at its best. We're doing the example of why that works, because we're retelling those stories like they're half our own. So again, this is why I get so fascinated. It feels like you have such an understanding of what makes a story work, what makes a story travel, why they get retold. Do they travel more than ever in a world of social media and digital media? Are they news agenda, for example? It feels like I'm continually swamped and I can barely keep up. How does it fit, if you like, the world as we are currently sat in, do you think?
Yeah, it's certainly true to say that stories travel kind of further than ever in terms of global distance, because I think the internet has really shrunk the world to such an extraordinary degree. You could be scrolling Reddit and there's people from all over the world chiming in with their opinions in this, that, and the other. But I don't think the basic nature of storytelling has changed
really
all that much. We use story to find out who we are, to work out who we ought to be. That kind of hasn't changed. I think one of the things that has changed quite a bit is the kind of the demand for story in terms of the pacing of story.
Go on.
But I don't think that's...
As in, do we need it quicker than ever?
Yeah, I remember I did a TED talk and they said it was the first time I ever heard that idea that you've got to grab them in the neck in the first sort of, I think they said 30 seconds, and now it just, post TikTok, it just shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. The internet has had that effect of shrinking people's attention span. One of my pet hates is when you watch a documentary or a TV show and they show you the whole show in like 45 seconds and then they start from the beginning, and I'm just like, I don't want to know, but that's what they have to do these days to get people to, they sort of promise there's story coming.
Yeah, did you see the Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, did you see their piece the other day where they were talking about, I think, their new show on Netflix, and they were describing how they are being recommended now to effectively begin repeating narrative giveaways because they're so aware that people are effectively on their device.
Double screening it.
And they're starting to miss bits. So they deliberately now within script repeat elements which they're kind of bemoaning, saying is, of course, feels absurd to the art. But there's an interesting duality, because as you say, podcasts are in rude hell. Rogan. Yeah. 3 hours, 3.5 hours, sometimes no problem at all. Number one.
That's it. I do think, and we saw this in going back to the magazine days. There's always a tension between the creators and the people who are worrying about these kind of things. And to me, the creators are usually right. They did destroy Loaded by turning it into a bad FHM.
Sure.
We said it was going to happen, and it happened. And I think this is right. I think Ben Affleck and Matt Damon are right. I feel like we lived through this golden age of television where television was quite difficult. Even something like Sopranos or Mad Men, really, really high quality television, and then it kind of goes away, and then White Lotus comes, and it's not that easy. It's really, really sophisticated writing, and people are kind of surprised that it's so successful. I think the sophistication of the public is often really underestimated by the people who have to who make the gatekeepers.
And what about your own personal output? Do you find you need to consider that? Or do you think, no, it's about need states? If people are sitting down with a book, they've taken that moment. And I find that, for example, with podcasts, I tend to listen on a walk to a destination or walking the dog. I'm listening 30, 40 minutes. I'm not distracted. I'm not in the scroll, and I'm not doing something else. Are you thinking, when are people digesting this? Do I need to write quicker? Do I need to get
obsessively going back to Loaded again? One of the first things I was told was, your job is to get them to read the last sentence of your feature. If they don't read the last sentence, you have failed. And so then you just think, God, how am I going to do that? And how you do that, I mean, partly is with structure. Structure's a big thing. Structure's really difficult. But it's about, always moving them on to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And, so some of the concepts in my book are quite difficult. They're quite in the weeds.
And when you know that they are, how do you deal with that? Do you almost preempt it and explain in that way?
One of the big challenges is to try and turn this really complex thing into something that's really sounds really simple. So I mean, when I published the Status Game was the result of years of thinking.
And tell us a little bit about it for those who've not read it.
Yeah, so the Status Game is basically arguing that one of the primary drivers of human behavior, human life, is the pursuit of status. And when we say status, we don't mean want to be famous, want to be rich. It's about the sense that I'm valuable to other people. I'm offering value to other people. That's the argument of the book, and it goes into everything from the internet to the rise and the fall of the communists, and it's a broad book, but it has lots of quite complex ideas from science in there. And one of the reviews that was published in the New Statesman said it was just obvious. The line was, "It's an eloquent and entertaining disquisition on the obvious." And it was like, I promise you this is not obvious, because I've had to take quite a few leaps here. Like in the literature at the time. When scientists talked about status, they always talked about competence, success-based status. So I was convinced that virtue was also a route to status, because if you look at the Pope isn't good at anything, but he's famous for being good. And somebody like Michelle Obama, she said, she's seen as this good person. So the book is also arguing that virtue is another route to status. And of course, we see that online all the time. But that wasn't obvious to the experts in status in psychology, because nobody really argued that. But then I took that as a compliment in a way, because it was like I've made it so easy to understand that you think it's obvious.
I love that. I think you're right to flip that into a compliment. We mentioned earlier that I think it was your father or your parents, but they wanted you to go to Oxford. I think you said you could barely get into your local grammar or whatever. What were they? Were they writers? Were they?
No, my parents were. My dad, he went to Oxford,
right?
But he was a working class sort of scholarship boy. I think he was the first person in his family to ever go to university, to Oxford. But it was a kind of choral scholarship. So he was kind of one of these. He was sort of a working class boy that had discovered the middle class life and was desperate for us all to follow in his footsteps. And of course, I didn't do that, and it was kind of humiliating because I was at this comprehensive school. I was a bad student, but it was also not a great school. None of my friends did very well either. So my dad sent me to this open day at Oxford, and I sat down with the English tutor, and she said to me, "So tell me, what's your favourite Tennessee Williams?" And I literally didn't know what she was talking about. What is it, a brand of crisps? I've got literally no idea. And part of it was like, Dad, if you wanted me to go to Oxford, I'm not at the right school for this. I could have gone to Skinner's, the local grammar school, but they were very, very Catholic, and they were very, very keen on me to go to the Catholic school. And I think I could have gone to Skinner's if I'd have been desperate, but I my friends were going to this Catholic comp. So yeah, it was kind of humiliating. And even then, I just thought there's no way I'm going to, I was there thinking, I'm not going to get into Oxford University. Yeah. I'm not doing any work. Yeah. I really wasn't. I was busy with the fanzine and busy with, my first girlfriend, who was taking up a lot of my mind.
Absolutely. A lot of mental space and the fanzine for the creativity. But your dad was an engineer, is that right?
No, my dad worked in education, Catholic
Got it.
education. The engineering was in my mum's side.
Oh,
of the family.
really?
Yeah. So,
But again, that feels, I guess the slightly lazy assumption would be someone with your writing prowess and the incredible kind of career that we're sort of touching upon and describing comes basically from an artsy style, dare I say it, whimsical, dreamlike, creative. But perhaps there is a link somewhere genetically to your mum's side engineering with the very forensic, mechanical, structural kind of understanding what words can do and how they can be used. Would you think that's fair?
I think that's true. Yeah, they were called the Donkins, and there was a lot of inventors. They were busy doing stuff in the Industrial Revolution, like inventing pens and something to do with paper. Like
Inventing pens is terribly appropriate.
there was a Donkin pen. I mean, I don't think any of it really went anywhere, but they were quite successful in their day. There was a Brian Donkin and another Brian Donkin. Yeah, and so I often think that that's the kind of the Donkin part of me is the kind of because he's just trying to figure out how stuff works, and like I want to know how writing works because if I want to be a good writer, I need to know how it works. So then discovering the science of storytelling was a big thing for me.
And I'm going to keep on the family tip because I want to get this right. Your great uncle wrote one of the original self-help books.
I think it was the one. It was called Self-Help. Like he
Literally,
named
that's
it.
the title.
He named it.
Tell us more about that, because then you wrote a book called Selfie, right? And but was there a direct lineage there? Give us a bit of colour to both of them.
No, I kind of discovered it really when I was writing that book.
Really?
Yeah, because I'd always had this. Samuel Smiles was a name that people talked about on my mum's side of the family. And then when I was researching Selfie, like the history of the West, so Selfie is like the story of the Western self, it's about how he became so self-obsessed in the West and what it means. And so I was writing about the kind of, the history of Western individualism. And of course, a big part of that is social mobility. The Industrial Revolution happened, and for the first time in history, people could be born poor and work their asses off and figure some stuff out and end up wealthy and successful. And it had never happened before. And so, and I started reading about this book, Self-Help by Samuel Smiles, which was a massive bestseller. And like me, he was a former journalist, and he was a Scotsman. He was a former journalist, and he wrote this book, Self-Help, and it became this huge bestseller. And it even had the kind of same form as modern self-help books. So it was a series of
That's amazing.
And stories about impressive people who.
So what sort of era would this have been? When would this have been roughly?
I think maybe 1850s at a guess, mid 1800s. I emailed my uncle, who's the kind of family archivist, saying, "Is this the guy that we're related to, Samuel Smiles?" And he said, "Yes, it is." What your great uncle? He sent me a big family, like a diagram, Just
love the fact that that's the case. There's a very interesting though piece emerging, and I know that's also a happy coincidence, but clearly there's something there. But the selfie book to the way you've immediately then described to the point around social mobility, I find particularly interesting, and you've referenced a couple of times of potential parent disappointment and your father's desire to move from a working class start to a middle class. Of course, in those days, it was an incredibly admirable pursuit. Now it could be maybe sneered at for some reason in a slightly snobbish way, and should have pride in your working class. But there was a bloody hard times that they were desperately trying to wrench a family out of.
Yeah.
It feels like that's a driver in you in your work. Books called Selfie and notion of status and your exploration of that. Is that fair? And is that an itch you're still scratching, and is there more to come in that kind of space?
There's always been a bit of discomfort for me because I do come from a comprehensive school background, and I didn't go to university. And then what you do in the media is you start working and mixing with mostly people who went to private school. And I haven't got a big chip on my shoulder about that. I'm not like a class warrior.
But you felt it.
You do see the difference. And one of the major differences is in confidence, self-confidence. Like people who want to go to public school have just got this, seem to have this just way of bearing themselves, which is impressive. And it's weird, I can always detect other comprehensive school people. Like I've worked with some others and I feel much more comfortable with them. We swear too much. We're much less self-confident. We don't have conversations where we're dropping in Tennessee Williams into conversations, because so
it's a telltale sign.
I know, yeah. So and I always feel uncomfortable in those environments because it's just sort of not because I feel, again, it's not like like a chip on my shoulder thing, but I just feel like I'm disappointing everybody. They think, oh, is this author?
I can
But
really,
it's
I can really relate. I went to a com and
Did you?
I think
Yeah, I
I think
thought
I'm sort of exploring my own thinking as I'm talking. But
Yeah.
there's something fascinating, and
Yeah.
I'm very proud of what various achievements in my life that they came from zero,
Yeah.
and handed nothing, and all of that kind of basic stuff. And I'm thinking, as you're talking, I'm like, do I have a chip on my shoulder? No, I don't. But I've definitely always noticed it.
Yeah.
And you've definitely also seen people when they've sneered that you weren't X or didn't come from Y.
Yeah.
And I definitely have found that a driving force. And I'm thinking, I mean, I went from a comp, and because my comp was frankly not great at all, then went to a local grammar where you had to basically just be good enough in your class.
Yeah.
I remember coming out of there, and the sixth form tutor said, "What are you off to do?" And I said, "I'm going to art college." And he just sneered at me and said, you won't last. You'll end up with a dog on a rope."
Really?
Actual quote.
Dog on a rope.
So a 17-year-old or whatever I was, 18-year-old.
God.
What a surprising thing to tell a young man. But my son now knows that, and he knows that there's something there that probably burnt very subconsciously, thinking, okay. Then a kind of a show you thing. So it's interesting. I don't think they're chips, but I do believe they're quite decent, necessary driving forces that pay perhaps sit subconsciously underneath.
I remember being in a situation at a magazine that I worked. It wasn't Loaded, but it was a different magazine, and I'm not going to mention which one it was for obvious reasons. But I was involved in a hiring decision, and there was a choice between somebody who went to a comp and somebody who went to Cambridge, and the pressure was very much on the Cambridge person. And I'd read their material, I'd read their work. The comp guy was on a different level. He had his own voice. He was really talented, and the Cambridge, it was just mediocre. It was just like.
Yeah,
Journalism speak, and look, I won the fight. And good for them for listening. And this guy who we hired ended up being just a fantastic hire. He's written incredible books. I'm not going to mention names, obviously, but that was a real like shit. That is the power of especially Oxbridge, where this person with no observable talent, they really wanted her, and it was all because of Cambridge and this comprehensive school guy. And then, without doubt, if it wasn't for me kicking off about it, he wouldn't have got the gig.
So the boy who stuck the tube article on the wall, would you have any idea of the version of you that sits here now, best-selling author, the incredible magazines that you wrote for, the teaching side, the shows, the conversations, the people that you've been in rooms with? Do you think he would have known that?
Not a chance.
Really?
Not a chance, no.
How does that make you feel?
I'm pleased. I think especially if you're working in the creative industries, one of the big things is getting over this mid-career hump. I've seen a lot of people who are really talented, who are doing really well in their 20s and 30s, and then it's really hard to sustain a creative career in your 40s and 50s because people just want the young
It's a societal thing, isn't it?
Yeah. So I'm pleased that I'm still working, as a 51-year-old person.
Yeah. How did that happen?
And also the fact that the first section of my life, it was just failure, lots and lots of failure and being in trouble and being shouted at. And my dad told me I was going to end up in a prison and going to end up in a home, like. He didn't say dog on a string, but it was, it was stuff like, it was all that kind of thing. I just didn't fit in at school. I wasn't doing any work. I was just not interested in anything at all that was going on at school.
To young people who will be listening or watching, there's part of that that's very inspiring, I think. But what on earth do you advise now, and a man in your position and what you have achieved and 50 whatever years old? Do you think, because I know Scott Galloway, for example, Prof G, I think he's absolutely awesome, but the bit I've massively disagreed with him recently, where he says it's a fallacy when you say follow your passions, and he's basically saying that's not true, you shouldn't follow your passions, that's just for rich people. I don't agree with that. I kind of think the opposite. I weirdly think in the world right now, and you kind of, if you're obsessed with something, that's great. Get infatuated with it, get as deep as you possibly can, because I think in this era maybe that's the most important thing. But what kind of advice can you give to young people right now? Maybe they've read something that you've done, maybe they're inspired by your story.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think that's a lot of old bollocks. Like it's just this obsession with money. It's just wrong. It's a truism, it's a cliche, but it's true that money doesn't make you happy. Of course, you need enough money to survive and not be stressed about everything that every problem that comes across in your life. Of course, you do. But I feel like the best way to achieve that is to figure out what you're quite good at, and what you're quite good at is 9 times out of 10 stuff that brings you some kind of joy. Because if it doesn't bring you any joy, you're never going to be good at it. Because in order to get good at stuff, you need to be self-motivated. You need to be working those extra hours. You need to be thinking about it over the weekend. When you're driving, it needs to be always on your mind. You have to have that in you in order to get good at stuff. So to say don't follow your passions is just it's insanity. Because it's a recipe for unhappiness. I mean, there are loads of people earning fortunes as lawyers and bankers who are absolutely fucking miserable. So it's just a nonsense. What we want as humans, connection and status. We want to feel, do we belong, and we feel respected and valued. That's what motivates people. That's what makes people happy. In work as well. So it's much more being needed, but also being respected. Like this person's good. Like, oh God, that's a really good idea you had. But that's what gives our lives meaning. And I feel like if you go for that, and it really is about going for competence, there are two routes to status in human life: competence and virtue. Forget about virtue. I mean, be a good person. It's much better to go for competence. Get good at something, because when you get good at something, people will respect you. And that's how I felt about getting a bit older. Like in your 20s and 30s, in your 20s, you're figuring out what status game you're going to play, and you're starting to play it. In your 30s, you're getting in there. And by the time you're in your 40s, I always think that your 40s is the age of expertise. By the time you're in your 40s, you should be good at something. And other people want to listen to what you've got to say about that thing. And so that comes from this relentless pursuit of competence. And I just don't think you can get there in any reliable way if it's not something that you're passionate about, if it's not something that you enjoy. So that's the recipe for a good life, I think. It isn't about, forget what you like. Life isn't about what you like. Life is about money. It's just madness. It baffles me that somebody would offer that as useful advice to people.
I love that. Also, the recipe that you're describing there feels, and I definitely don't want to be gender biased, but it feels incredibly applicable right now for young men and the conversation around young men.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've engaged much necessarily on the topic, or might have seen Through's documentary on the manosphere recently, but the way you've described what you think might be what we respond to as humans, you were saying, as opposed to, it's not a masculine thing that you were isolating. But that feels such a wonderful set of almost rules or ingredients to help combat what is clearly a problem right now in society, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I was thinking that, but not saying it.
Yeah.
But it's especially true for men. Like a core part of masculinity is competence, is being good at something. And a lot of the behaviors that people talk about men with contempt come from our deep need to be seen as competent. So what is mansplaining? Mansplaining is you showing off your competence. So I know about this. Yeah. And we get enthusiastic and excited. And unfortunately, we often get, pilloried and dismissed for that and accused of being patronizing, when actually that's not what we're doing. Like if you listen to a bunch of guys talking about football, they're kind of mansplaining to each other.
Absolutely.
But they're not taking offense. They're almost dueling with, I know this and I know this, and if only I was managing the team, there would be this. And it's fun. That's how men communicate. That's how men relate. It's a very male way of bonding. And so, to dismiss it as mansplaining, of course, there are patronizing men. There are patronizing women too, by the way. Yeah. Think about male luxury goods, expensive watches, expensive cars. There's a deep element of competence to those things. You ask a watch nerd about their watch, they're going to tell you for half an hour, well, it's made by craftsmen, and it's all about competence. Why is this sports car really good? And they've got on and on and on and on. So knowledge, competence, getting good at stuff, it's the best of masculinity, and we shouldn't be ashamed of that. I'm making no commentary on women.
Describing the best of masculinity shouldn't have to be caveated, and I think it's very interesting that both you and I perhaps immediately would.
Well, of course, because that's the world we live in.
And that is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
the best of masculinity surely is something that can be celebrated. And again, perhaps I'm trying to crowbar it, but I'm not. But that's where story comes in. And I love what you've just said there about the best of masculinity. And you're talking about brands. Is it Patek Philippe, the watch, and the whole thing about you don't acquire it, you're only handed down. It's about origins and provenance and history and craftsmanship.
Passing it down to your son,
And there's a strength to that and a solidity. And that is they are masculine traits or forms. There's a shape that feels masculine. I love your point there about That's something that we can celebrate or should be celebrated.
Yes. And we need to celebrate it more, but unfortunately, we do live in a world where we have to do all this throat clearing. Where as soon as you start talking about men, people think, "Well, what about the women?" And it's like, well, can we just talk about the men for a bit? And I think that's why men are suffering at the moment, because I think we're in an era in which we highlight the worst of men and the best of women. It's just the default at the moment, and I think. I think a generation of men are suffering under that because it's just like they're kind of a bit ashamed of being a man, and I don't think they should be.
You described a culture within magazines that was highly charged,
very masculine,
hugely masculine, but it would have had as much laughter and banter and piss taking, and let's be honest, the absolute juice of friendship is generally based around humor, actually, as well.
Absolutely.
But you had to prove yourself in ways that aren't fighting. They don't go back down to that level of tribal humanity, but they are about proof and position and hierarchy. I'd love that to be the discourse next on solving this crisis of masculinity that supposedly exists, whether it be toxic masculinity or what we can do to improve young men or help them.
And it's interesting thing about the Loaded experience as well, because it was very masculine. It was very masculine, but not in a physical way. Nobody was hitting anybody, but it was tough. It was like, we are going to judge you on your first sentence, and we're going to make you feel shit if it's bad. And it was hard, but I don't regret a moment of it. It sounds so cliche, but it did kind of make me as a writer. It was like I took it really seriously. Writing after that, it wasn't a game. It was serious. I'm hugely grateful to have been kind of thrown into that bear pit at an early age.
Yeah, it's like a refinement process, like a distillery over here. My mate Scott Manson, who was at Loaded, who I think he used to describe A.A. Gill's writing, and I'd never really read it, maybe the Odd Times magazine, but he described it as there isn't a single wasted word.
Yeah.
And when I reread it, I think he gave me a book there once of all of his stuff, and I'm like, bloody hell, I see what you mean. There isn't a single sentence that's fluff.
Yeah, he was my god when I was starting
really?
A.A. Gill. Yeah, my heart breaking slightly because it was my ambition. I want to be as good as A.A. Gill.
Wow.
And then I had lunch with a guy called Alex Bilmes, who was editor of Esquire, who used to edit A.A. Gill, and he said the thing about A.A. Gill is he talks like he writes. And I was like, are you joking? He said, no, he talks like that. And I was like, but how is that possible? But then I realized you're never going to be A.A. Gill because you just don't have that skill. You don't have that ability. It was a humbling but important moment, really.
Are there people now out there who match that kind of quality that you looked up to so much in that era? Or for the reasons you mentioned earlier, from lack of money, investment, time into long form writing, is it harder to spot that level of writing talent?
I don't think there's anybody out there that's anywhere near as good as A.A. Gill.
Really?
I think
Will there ever be again?
Sure, of course. I mean, Hunter S. Thompson was as good as A.A. Gill. It's like there are a few writers that you read and every paragraph is a bit like poetry. Now, Hunter S. Thompson was a bit like that. Like you can't fake it.
What's next? Where are we getting next for the next few years? What's the output from Will Storr going to be? What can we look out for?
I'm working on writing on a new book at the moment. I'm not ready to sort of talk about it particularly yet, so I'm afraid.
Are these really long projects?
They're long in the sense of that I think about them for years.
Gosh.
And then the writing generally takes a few months. Again, with the engineering thing, I'm very, very technical. Everything is structured to kind of minute degree before I start writing. So the whole thing is.
So when you say you're thinking about it, you're actually writing notes and sketching out thoughts and presumably phrases and linking and search, right?
So
what do they exist in? Notebooks?
Yeah, lots of Google Notes,
really?
And lots of like Kindle,
really,
highlights and notes. But what my process is that I don't have children, so which means I can travel quite a lot. So what I do is 2 or 3 times a year I go away to a nice hotel for a few weeks and have just a very intense session of reading. So I read dozens of books, that I've been sort of picking out over the months, and so it's generally reading and going on 3 or 4 hour walks around Tokyo, Bangkok, or whatever it is, with my earphones in, and just thinking, and the books really emerge out of those few weeks. Like I feel like I come back from those trips like I've done about 6 months work in 3 weeks.
So when you're walking in and you're in the streets of Tokyo or whatever it might be, is it a deliberate effort to kind of find what it is that you're looking for at that time, or is it a far more like idea that comes to you in the shower style process? Then if you see the Beatles Get Back, where you see the beautiful scene where Paul McCartney comes out with basically Get Back, and it's almost like he extracts a song that is one of the greatest records of all time from the ether. It just appears.
I love that clip.
It's just wonderful. And you're like, what is that? That's basically magic.
By the time I go on my trips, I will know what I'm writing. And so, and what I've done is I've just gathered sort of dozens of books that might be useful to that thing. When I was writing The Science of Storytelling, I did most of the thinking for that in Ho Chi Minh City.
Wow, really?
Yeah, like over 3 weeks. I'm writing about the science of storytelling, and I'm reading all these mostly science books. They're quite very dry, and I have to say, it's like being at school. I don't really enjoy it because I just find it so.
But that's quite a juxtaposition
unbelievably
against
boring.
the sights and sounds and smells, cultural cues of Ho Chi Minh City, right?
Yeah, and I'm reading these books thinking, how is this about storytelling? Can this tell me anything about storytelling? And often you're making leaps that you're reading about subject X, but you're thinking actually this is about story. So it's making those links, and that's how it tends to happen.
They're deliberately left field, or they deliberately don't have a starting point. That's what I'm finding really interesting there. You are trying to synthesize and link elements in order to find presumably freshness and what's
So for an example from the science of storytelling was when I was reading about the psychology of curiosity. Now, George Lowenstein, who does that work, he's not thinking about storytelling at all. But he did this big paper about how to create spontaneous curiosity in people. It's things like there's an incomplete set of information, like a jigsaw piece missing, that makes people spontaneously curious. I was like, he's describing a police procedural drama. Like he's literally describing Prime Suspect.
So cool.
Those are those great moments where you think, fuck, this is about a story. Those are the moments that I kind of live for, because I just think, yes. Another one from a recent book where I was thinking about how my model for storytelling is all humans want three things, which is survival, connection, and status. Those are the three things that all humans want, and those are the things that all storytelling is about. And then I was thinking about, you've got a film like The Revenant, which is a survival story, being chased by a fucking bear. You've got I don't know, Brokeback Mountain or Stand By Me, which is their connection stories. And then you've got like Barbie or Whiplash, their status stories. But then if you think about the greatest stories that have ever been told, the stories that you can go back to again and again and again and again, and that never die, they're about all three of those things at once. So Star Wars, The Godfather, Romeo and Juliet, they're all about survival and connection and status in kind of equal proportion. When you sort of come across stuff like that, when you think up stuff like that, you just think, those are the moments that I kind of really live for, that I get excited about.
I'm so fascinated by your process, by the way, and I've got this very lovely image in my mind. I'm quite envious, I'll be honest, of these incredible travel trips, taking on either highly culturally stimulating places like Ho Chi Minh City or Tokyo, wherever you're describing, or is it always lively places, or do you go to real retreat style settings? Would you go and write in the desert?
It's cities. From now on, it's just big cities, so I can walk around and.
But you almost have this formula. I don't know if you see it as one yourself, but you're describing 10, 15, whatever it might be, books that you absolutely immerse yourself in, absorb, and voraciously read. And you've got this very stimulating city-like environment, and probably a whole bunch of science, inverted commas, probably quite dry to the common layman person like myself.
Well, and me,
probably quite indecipherable.
Yeah.
But in that almost triangle, you seem to then piece together what becomes magic and fresh and new, and that's really interesting.
You're trying to come up with something new. Like you can't write a book which is just a rewriting of all these science books. You've got to put it all together in a way that's new. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. It's not interesting, is it?
Your point, I'd just love to go back to where you were talking about the stories like your Stand By Me's that might have one of those three ingredients versus those that have got the many. What about the ones that chapterize? So I'm quite cliche. Well, I think one of my favorite movies ever, I watched it when I was 16, was Pulp Fiction, and I still adore it. But part of the reason I always say why I adore it so much is the fact that I can come in at any time during the day or night at any point, and it will be on, and I'm straight into a chapter, and I'm in. In other words, there's something around the chapterizing of it that I've always found incredibly accessible.
One of my favorite documentaries is called The Five Obstructions. Have you heard of The Five Obstructions? Oh, it's amazing. Lars von Trier. It's a film about filmmaking, and so his favorite film is, he thinks it's the perfect film, and it's this Norwegian short called, I think it's called The Perfect Man. It's a black and white thing called The Perfect Man. I think it was made in the 60s, and his thesis is the film is so good that you couldn't break it. You couldn't make it a bad film. So he challenges the guy who made the original film to remake it 5 times, but each of the 5 times it gives him some obstructions. You've got to make it as animation, and he's like, oh God, I hate animation, and it gets worse and worse and worse. And then one of them is like, what's the worst place you've ever seen in the world, you've ever been to? And he's like, the worst place I've ever been to in the world is the red light district in Mumbai. It was a vision of hell on earth. And he's like, you got to go and make it there. And yeah, so it's an amazing, and that's obviously broken down into these 5 chapters, and you see him, it's perfect storytelling. It's, overcoming obstacles in pursuit of a goal, and then you see sort of the end result, what he's done. It's such an amazing celebration of creativity.
Right. The notion of those obstacles is so interesting. It reminds me of the thing that Disney apparently always did, which you probably will know, but he had the early Disney company had 3 rooms of distinct sets of people in each room. And then on the creation of a story, the film, the first room was dreamers. People would quite literally be dreaming up and coming up with the concept of the movie, the story. The next room was realists, where they would start to basically pull it apart a little bit and kind of effectively storyboard it through. The third room was critics, where people had to, and then this is reminding me of your obstacles point, rip it to shreds.
Wow.
If the story could work its way through all 3 rooms and survive, it became a film like Bambi or whatever we knew. And Walt Disney, in his brilliant arrogance, said he was the only person in the world who could inhabit all 3 of those rooms. Well, I feel like we could speak to you all day. I'm pretty certain I'm getting lots of producers in my ear star moments saying that it's already been long enough. For me, this is something of an education. I can't wait to now go back and voraciously look through, read all of your old stuff. But thank you so much for coming to StoryCo. You have basically embodied what it is and the reason for doing this show. So it's a genuine pleasure to have you here. Thank you.
No, I'm honoured. Thank you for being so kind to us. It's been a really great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Will. If you enjoyed this week's show, please follow us on Instagram at StoryCo Pod, subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. StoryCo is a Telltale Industries production. The producer is Jago Lee. It's recorded in Studio One at the brilliant TYX Studios in King's Cross. Special thanks to Jack Freegard, Tyler Newton, and Issa Gibson. I'm James Kirkham. This has been a masterclass in how storytelling pays in this modern media landscape. Please go out, tell a story that matters, and we'll see you next week.